never thought my life would come to this. Curled up under a freezing bridge, clutching a torn blanket, my stomach empty, my pride shattered. I'd lost everything. My job, my apartment, my friends, even my hope. The city lights shimmered above me, mocking me with a life I could no longer touch. I had become invisible, one of those forgotten souls people cross the street to avoid. I told myself no one cared, no one ever would. But one night, headlights swept across the bridge, slowing down until they stopped right in front of me. I froze, expecting police or worse. Then the window rolled down, and a familiar voice gasped my name. I lifted my head, blinking through dirt and tears, and saw her. My sister. The same sister I hadn't spoken to in years. The one who had built an empire while I stumbled through failure after failure. The one I envied. The one I thought had erased me from her life. Her face was a mix of shock and heartbreak as she stepped out, designer heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't hesitate, didn't scold, didn't demand answers. She knelt right there on the cold ground and pulled me into her arms. I couldn't speak. Shame crushed me, but she only whispered, "Come with me. You're not staying here another night." Within days, I was living in a luxurious condo I didn't deserve, with $5 million in a trust set up in my name. I thought my nightmare was finally over, that my sister had given me a second chance at life. But I was wrong. 'Cause soon people came. People who knew about the money, the condo, and my fragile new beginning. And they didn't come to congratulate me. They came to take everything. The wind cut through the city that night like a blade, sharp and merciless, and I had nothing to shield myself except a thin, torn blanket I had fished from a dumpster days earlier. I curled tighter into myself, pressing my knees against my chest, trying to block out the ache in my stomach and the trembling that had long since taken over my body. Beneath the bridge, the sound of rushing traffic above was a cruel reminder of a world still moving forward, a world I no longer belonged to. Every honk, every set of headlights flashing past, seemed to mock me, each one a reminder that I had fallen so far that the only place left for me was the shadows no one wanted to look at. I wasn't just broke. I was invisible, forgotten, the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. I hadn't always been this way. I had dreams once, plans for my future, even people who believed in me. But failure has a way of carving you hollow, piece by piece, until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. It started small, a lost job, a missed rent payment, a few calls ignored. Then it snowballed into eviction, debt collectors, burned bridges, and finally nothing. Nothing but the echo of my own mistakes haunting me when I tried to sleep on the cold concrete. The hardest part wasn't even the hunger or the cold. It was the shame. The constant reminder that I had wasted every chance I'd been given, that no one was coming to save me, and maybe no one should. That night I thought about disappearing. Permanently. The river wasn't far from where I lay, its black water sliding silently beneath the bridge. I imagined stepping into it, letting it close over my head, letting the current wash me away like the city had already done. The thought scared me, but at the same time it offered relief. No more hunger, no more shame, no more nights of pretending I wasn't already dead inside. But just as that dark thought rooted itself in me, a sudden flash of headlights broke across the underpass. I squinted, expecting the familiar sight of police lights or maybe some curious kids looking for trouble. Cars never slowed here, not for me, not for anyone. But this one did. The engine hummed quietly as the car eased to a stop in front of me. I sat up a little, tightening the blanket around my shoulders, heart pounding in panic. My first instinct was to run. I had learned quickly that when people notice you in a place like this, it rarely ends well. But then the window rolled down, and through the blur of my tired eyes I saw her. My breath caught. My heart stuttered. For a second I thought I was hallucinating. "God, is that you?" the voice whispered, breaking with disbelief. It was my sister. I hadn't seen her in years. Not at birthdays, not at holidays, not even at our parents' funerals. She had risen high into a world I had never been able to touch, while I fell lower than she could have ever imagined. We hadn't spoken in so long that part of me assumed she had erased me from her life completely. And yet, there she was. My sister, the millionaire businesswoman, stepping out of a sleek black car and into the freezing night, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she approached. I wanted to hide my face, to bury myself in the blanket so she wouldn't see what I had become. But she saw me anyway. Her eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. In that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had. Dirt and shame caked onto every inch of me. I expected her to scold me, to turn away, to confirm what I already believed, that I wasn't worth saving. But she didn't. She knelt right there in the dirt and the cold and wrapped her arms around me. I stiffened, too stunned to move, too embarrassed to let myself believe it was real. I smelled her perfume, expensive and soft, mixing with the grime that clung to me, and I wanted to push her away. I didn't deserve her compassion, but she only held me tighter. "You're not staying here another night," she said firmly, her voice breaking with both pain and determination. I couldn't find words. My throat burned, and for the first time in years, tears stung my eyes. I had cried plenty of times in private, but never like this, never where anyone could see. She didn't flinch. She wiped my face with her sleeve as if I were a child again, as if she hadn't become this untouchable figure of wealth and success. For her, in that moment I was just her brother. And somehow, that hurt more than all the cold nights under the bridge combined. Before I could protest, she was pulling me to my feet. My legs shook from weakness, and I nearly stumbled, but she held me steady. The warmth of the car enveloped me the second I sat inside, and I sank into the leather seat as though it might swallow me whole. I stared at the city lights through the tinted glass, unable to process how I had gone from hopelessness to this in the span of minutes. She didn't ask me for explanations right away. She didn't demand to know how I'd ended up here or why I hadn't called her when I still had the chance. She just drove, her hands gripping the wheel tightly, her jaw clenched. I knew her well enough to recognize she was holding back questions, maybe even anger, but she didn't let it out. Not yet. When we arrived at her condo, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the stars, I hesitated. I looked up at it, my reflection warped in the mirrored doors, and I felt like an imposter. People like me didn't belong in places like this. But she wouldn't let me retreat. She took my hand and guided me inside, past the doorman who gave me a curious glance but said nothing, past the marble floors that echoed beneath my worn shoes, past the mirrored elevator walls that forced me to confront my own broken reflection. When we finally reached her condo, she opened the door and led me in. Froze. The place was like something out of a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the glittering skyline, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, soft light spilling across polished surfaces. I couldn't step forward. I felt like one dirty footprint would ruin it all. She didn't give me a choice. She guided me to the couch, sat me down, and pressed a glass of water into my hands. My fingers shook so badly I nearly spilled it. She sat across from me, finally letting silence stretch between us. Her eyes studied me. Tired eyes, yes, but filled with something I hadn't expected to see. Love. In that moment, the weight of what had just happened hit me like a storm. Hours before, I had been ready to disappear, ready to give up on life completely. And now, here I was in the warmth and safety of my sister's home, the faint trace of her perfume still clinging to my clothes. I didn't understand why she had done it, why she hadn't turned away, but one thing was certain. My life had just changed forever. And somewhere, deep inside the part of me I thought was long dead, a tiny flicker of hope sparked again. The first morning I woke up in my sister's condo felt unreal, as if I had slipped into someone else's life and was only borrowing it for a moment before being cast back into the streets. The bed was so soft it felt like a trap, pulling me deeper into comfort I didn't think I deserved. For a while I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside the window. Sunlight streamed across the room, warm against my skin, and I realized it had been months since I had woken up without the sting of cold air biting into my bones. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, rich and inviting, and I hesitated before swinging my legs over the side of the bed, ashamed that I had tracked the filth of the streets into such a pristine place. I had showered the night before, scrubbing until my skin was raw, but the dirt of homelessness isn't just on the skin. It seeps into your soul. I padded quietly down the hallway, trying to be invisible in a place that was anything but. My sister was already at the kitchen island, dressed in a simple blouse and trousers, her hair pulled back neatly, looking like the powerful woman I had watched from a distance in magazines and online interviews. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the smile of a public figure. It was warm, familiar, the smile of the girl I had grown up with, the one who used to sneak cookies from the jar and whisper secrets into the night when we were kids. "Sit," she said gently, sliding a plate of eggs and toast across the counter toward me. My stomach growled so loudly it embarrassed me, but I didn't wait for her to insist again. I ate quickly, almost too quickly, and she didn't scold me for my lack of manners. She just watched, sipping her coffee, her eyes soft but filled with questions she hadn't yet asked. When I finally slowed down, she leaned forward. "I need you to tell me what happened," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't accusing. It was careful, almost fragile, as though she were afraid I might break if she pushed too hard. I lowered my eyes to the plate, shame rising like bile in my throat. Where could I even begin? That I had been foolish, careless, chasing dreams without plans, burning through opportunities like paper in a fire. That I had ignored every warning, every chance to turn back, until I was left with nothing. I wanted to lie, to make it sound like bad luck, like circumstances beyond my control, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not with her. "I lost my job," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "And then the rent. And then everything else. I just kept falling, and I didn't know how to stop." She listened without interrupting, her fingers tightening around her mug as I spoke. I told her about the nights I had gone hungry, about the bridges I had slept under, about the people I had met in the dark corners of the city who were just like me. Forgotten. I left out some details, the ugliest ones, because I couldn't bear to see pity in her eyes, but even with what little I said, I felt exposed, raw, like I was tearing open wounds I had stitched shut with silence. When I finished, the room was heavy with quiet. She set her mug down and reached across the counter, placing her hand over mine. "You should have called me," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "I would have helped you." I shook my head, ashamed, because the truth was I hadn't called her not just out of pride but out of resentment. I had envied her success, her wealth, her perfect life. I had convinced myself she wouldn't want me around, that my failures were a burden she didn't need. She must have read it in my silence, because she gave a sad smile. "I never stopped being your sister," she said softly. "Not for 1 second." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they cut deeper, because I realized how many years I had wasted keeping distance between us. After breakfast, she surprised me again. She led me into her office, a room with a wide desk and shelves lined with books and framed photos of her standing with people I had only ever seen on TV. On the desk sat a stack of papers neatly arranged in a folder. "I've set something up for you," she said, sliding the folder toward me. Confused, I opened it and nearly dropped it. Inside was documentation of a trust fund, an account with my name on it, holding $5 million. My hands trembled as I stared at the numbers, too large for my brain to process. I looked up at her in shock, but she only folded her arms and watched me with a calm expression. "This isn't charity," she explained firmly. "This is a chance. You're not going back under that bridge. Not ever again." My mouth opened but no sound came out. $5 million. More money than I could ever have imagined having in my life. My mind spun with possibilities, fears, doubts. "I can't take this," I finally managed, my voice breaking. "I don't deserve it." She came around the desk and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You deserve a life," she said simply. "You deserve a future. And I'm not asking you to pay me back. All I'm asking is that you don't waste this chance." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, and I turned away, ashamed that even after everything she had done, I still couldn't hold myself together. She didn't scold me. She just stood there, steady, until the storm inside me calmed. That night, when I lay in bed again, the city lights winking through the window, I thought about how quickly everything had changed. Just days ago, I had been ready to give up on life entirely. Now, I had not only shelter and food but a future I hadn't dared to dream of. But as relief seeped into me, so did unease. Something about it felt too fragile, too exposed. As though the world would notice I suddenly had value again and come tearing it away. And in the stillness of the night, staring out at the glowing skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone already knew. Someone was watching. At first, life in the condo felt like stepping into a dream I was terrified of waking from, a fragile gift that I tiptoed around so I wouldn't break it. Days passed quietly, with my sister checking in often, urging me to start thinking about how to rebuild, even suggesting classes, therapy, or business mentors she could connect me with. I wanted to believe her words, wanted to believe I could grow into the kind of man who deserved another chance, but beneath the comfort there was always a whisper of dread, a fear that everything could vanish as quickly as it had arrived. That fear proved right the evening I came back from a walk around the block and found a folded piece of paper slipped under the condo door. My chest tightened as I picked it up, expecting some advertisement or notice, but instead in rough handwriting it read, "We know about the money. Call us or we'll come find you." There was a phone number scrawled beneath the words, and my stomach dropped as though I'd been punched. My hands trembled so badly I nearly tore the paper in half. I didn't tell my sister right away. I didn't want to worry her, didn't want to prove to her that I was still weak, still a magnet for trouble. But that night I barely slept, every sound outside the condo making me flinch, every shadow against the window pulling me closer to panic. The next day it got worse. As I left the building, a man I didn't recognize was leaning against a black car across the street. He wasn't doing anything obvious, just watching, but the way his eyes tracked me made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, paranoia born from the note, but when I turned the corner, another man stood near the cafe, pretending to scroll through his phone, though I caught him glance at me in the reflection of the glass. I hurried back upstairs, heart pounding, locking the door behind me and pressing my back to it as though that thin piece of wood could keep danger at bay. When my sister arrived that evening, she immediately noticed something was wrong. I wanted to tell her everything, but shame kept me quiet again. She had just given me a new life, and here I was, already dragging shadows into it. So I smiled, forced laughter, and pretended I was fine. But 2 nights later I couldn't pretend anymore. I woke to the sound of movement outside my door. Soft footsteps, a shuffle, and then a whisper I couldn't make out. I crept closer, my body rigid with fear, and through the peephole I saw the blurred shape of a man standing there, head tilted toward the lock as though testing it. My breath hitched, and I stepped back, afraid even the sound of it would give me away. After what felt like hours he left, but not before sliding another note under the door. This one was shorter, colder. "Time is running out." My hands shook as I read it, and before I could stop myself, I called my sister. She arrived within minutes, robe still wrapped around her, face pale but fierce as she listened to me stammer through the story. Her expression hardened in a way I hadn't seen before, a steel edge beneath her calm. "You should have told me after the first note," she said firmly, but not unkindly. "This isn't something you handle alone." She made a few calls right then, her voice sharp, commanding, so different from the gentle tone she used with me. Within an hour, security had been arranged for the building, and cameras were being checked. She tried to reassure me, telling me it might just be someone phishing, some scam, but I could see in her eyes she didn't believe it either. She knew, just as I did, that someone out there wanted what I had been given. That night, even with guards downstairs, I couldn't shake the image of faceless figures watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The condo, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a glass box, too exposed, too fragile, and I lay awake listening to the hum of the city, wondering if I had been foolish to think I could start over. For years I had been invisible, unwanted, forgotten. Now, with $5 million tied to my name, it felt like I had painted a target on my back, and the people circling outside were ready to remind me that even miracles come with a price. The storm broke on a night when the city seemed quieter than usual, the streets below glistening with rain, the condo lights casting long shadows across the floor as I sat awake, unable to find peace. I had tried reading, tried watching television, tried convincing myself that the security guards downstairs were enough, but nothing could settle the restless fear that had taken root in my chest. My sister had gone home earlier after checking in on me, promising to return in the morning with more news from the investigators she had hired to trace the threatening notes. I told her I'd be fine, but deep down I knew I was lying, not just to her but to myself. Around midnight, when the rain softened to a drizzle, I heard it. A faint click at the door, followed by the slow creak of pressure against the lock. My breath froze. I had been dreading this moment, imagining it night after night, and now it was here. Moving as silently as I could, I slipped off the couch and crouched low, heart pounding so violently I thought it might give me away. The handle turned slightly, then stopped, as though whoever was on the other side wanted to test if I was awake. Then came the sound of metal scraping, the unmistakable rhythm of lockpicks at work. My mouth went dry, and instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The condo was too open, too exposed, with wide windows and nowhere to hide except the bedroom, and I knew if I trapped myself there, it would be over. The lock gave with a soft snap that felt like thunder in the silence, and the door eased open. 2 men stepped inside, both dressed in dark clothes, their movements practiced and quiet. One carried a crowbar, the other a knife glinting faintly in the dim light. I pressed myself against the wall, praying the shadows would keep me hidden, but the man with the knife swept his gaze across the room with the cold certainty of a predator. "He's here," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. My stomach lurched. They weren't guessing. They knew. "Let's make this quick," the other replied, shutting the door with a soft click behind him. My body trembled uncontrollably, every instinct screaming for me to cry out, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to believe if I stayed still, they might not find me, but deep down I knew they had come for me specifically. The man with the crowbar began rifling through drawers, scattering papers and objects across the floor, while the one with the knife moved steadily toward the bedroom. In a panic, I made the smallest noise, a shuffle of my foot against the hardwood, and his head snapped in my direction. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, the fragile safety I had clung to shattered. "There!" he hissed, lunging toward me. I bolted, scrambling across the room, crashing into a table and sending a lamp shattering to the ground. Adrenaline surged through me, and I sprinted for the balcony, the only escape I could see. My hands fumbled at the sliding glass door, shoving it open just as the man reached for me. I stumbled onto the balcony, the rain-slicked concrete slippery under my bare feet, and turned to see his knife gleam inches from me. "You don't want to do this," I gasped, desperation spilling from my voice, but his sneer told me he had no interest in mercy. "We don't want you," he growled. "We want the money. Hand it over and maybe you walk away." My chest heaved, words tumbling out without thought. "I don't even have it. It's in a trust. I don't control it." He didn't care. His partner appeared behind him, crowbar raised, his eyes cold with hunger. The walls closed in around me, the city lights stretching endlessly below, and I realized how close I was to the edge, the rail pressing against my back. Just as the man lunged again, a voice tore through the room like a whip. "Enough!" It was my sister. She stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, her presence sharp and commanding. For a split second, the men hesitated, thrown off by her sudden arrival. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said, her tone deadly calm. "Put the weapons down, and maybe you'll leave here breathing." The man with the knife barked a laugh, but I saw his grip falter. My sister stepped forward, phone in her hand, and with a click, she hit a button. "Everything you've done tonight is already on camera," she said, her eyes like steel. "Security is on the way. The police too. You still have a choice." The air thickened with tension. The men glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping in where arrogance had been. Then, with a frustrated curse, the one with the crowbar shoved past, storming toward the door. "This isn't over," he spat, his glare lingering on me like a promise. His partner followed reluctantly, knife still twitching in his hand before he finally shoved it into his pocket and disappeared into the hall. My knees buckled as soon as they were gone, and I collapsed against the balcony rail, shaking uncontrollably. My sister was at my side in seconds, pulling me into her arms, steady and unyielding. "I told you," she murmured, her voice softer now but filled with fire. "You don't face this alone." For the first time since she had found me under that bridge, I let myself sob openly, the fear, shame, and relief crashing over me in waves. She didn't let go, even as sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, promising safety I hadn't felt in years. That night, as the police took statements and security scoured the footage, I realized just how much danger I was truly in. Not because of who I was, but because of what I now represented. To desperate men, $5 million was more than a lifeline. It was worth blood. And as I sat beside my sister, watching her speak with authority to officers and guards, I understood something else. She wasn't just protecting me with her wealth. She was protecting me with her strength. A strength I had never respected enough before. But even with her power, even with the police involved, a chilling thought rooted itself in me. The men weren't gone. They would be back. And next time they might not leave without taking everything. The days that followed the break-in blurred together, a haze of police reports, security upgrades, and sleepless nights where every creak of the building set my nerves on fire. But through it all, my sister never once wavered. She moved like a storm contained in human form, sharp, decisive, relentless, making calls to people I didn't even know existed, people with voices that carried weight in corners of the city most would never see. It was as if the moment those men had stepped into her home, she had flipped a switch, shifting from the caring sister who had lifted me out of the gutter to a force of nature who refused to let anyone threaten what was hers. I watched in awe as she navigated meetings with private investigators, negotiated with law enforcement, and even leaned on contacts she had built in her climb to the top of her empire. She told me little of the details, perhaps to shield me, but I could feel the machinery of her influence grinding into motion, turning every resource she had toward one goal, ending this. Still, the fear inside me didn't fade. I found myself jumping at shadows, terrified to leave the condo, ashamed at how weak I had become despite the wealth and safety surrounding me. One evening, as we sat together overlooking the glittering skyline, I confessed it all. The guilt, the fear, the sense that I didn't deserve any of this, that maybe I had brought the danger upon us by being who I was. She listened quietly, her eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, she leaned forward, her voice steady but fierce. "This isn't your fault. Do you understand? You didn't ask for this, and you didn't cause it. The only mistake you made was believing you had to fight alone. That ends now." For the first time, I let her words settle into me, not as comfort but as truth. A week later, everything came to a head. It was late evening when she told me we were going out, her tone leaving no room for argument. I expected dinner or another tense meeting with lawyers, but instead she drove us to an unmarked building on the edge of the city, sleek and discreet, guarded by men who opened the door for her as if they knew her well. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet power. Offices filled with people speaking in hushed voices, screens lit up with information I couldn't comprehend. She guided me through the halls until we entered a room where 2 detectives and a man in a tailored suit waited. On the table lay photographs of the men who had broken into the condo, along with others I didn't recognize. My stomach turned at the sight, memories of the knife flashing before my eyes, but my sister's hand on my shoulder anchored me. The man in the suit began speaking, outlining connections between the intruders and a small but dangerous network known for extortion, targeting anyone tied to sudden wealth. "They caught wind of your trust," he explained, his gaze shifting to me. "They thought you'd be easy prey." His words stung, but I couldn't deny their truth. I'd been easy prey. My sister didn't let me dwell on it. She cut in sharply, demanding details about arrests, prosecutions, guarantees of safety. Her voice carried such authority that even the detectives deferred to her, promising action was already underway. By the end of the meeting, I understood that the men who had haunted my nights were finished. Not just chased away, but dismantled, exposed, their grip on others torn apart by the web of power my sister had summoned. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even just money. It was her determination, her refusal to allow fear to win. Driving home that night, I sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faint stirrings of safety, of a future not constantly under threat. When we parked, I turned to her, struggling to find words big enough to hold what I felt. "You saved me," I whispered, my voice breaking. She smiled sadly, shaking her head. "No," she said softly. "I reminded you who you are. Now it's your turn to save yourself." Her words struck deep, and for the first time I understood. The condo, the money, the protection. None of it mattered if I kept seeing myself as the man under the bridge. She had pulled me out of the darkness, but what I did next would decide whether I stayed out. That night, lying in the warmth of my bed, I made a promise to myself. Not just to rebuild, not just to survive, but to honor the faith my sister had placed in me, to prove that her fight had not been wasted. Months passed, and slowly, life began to reshape itself. I started small, therapy sessions, rebuilding routines, even volunteering at shelters where I saw echoes of my past in every weary face. The fear didn't vanish overnight, but with each step forward, it lessened, replaced by something stronger. Resolve. My sister visited often, watching quietly as I grew steadier, prouder, more alive. We talked late into the night sometimes about the years we had lost, the choices we had made, the bond that had nearly broken but refused to die. One evening, standing together on the balcony where fear had nearly ended me, she placed her hand on mine and said, "You've come farther than you realize." And for once, I believed her. In the end, the bridge where she had found me became a place I returned to. Not to sleep, not to give up, but to remember. I stood there one quiet morning, watching the river move beneath, the city bustling above, and I thought about how close I had come to disappearing, how easily I could have been one of the nameless, forgotten souls lost in the shadows. But I wasn't, because my sister had seen me when no one else had. She had given me more than money, more than shelter. She had given me back my life. And this time I wasn't going to waste it.